This episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez contains adult subject matter which may or may not be favorable amongst listeners. Listener discretion is advised. On today's episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, my film review is Dressed to Kill, followed by my segment Allow Me to Explain, and it all starts right now. This is Film Talk, and you are listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And now, here is my latest review. My film review for this episode is Dressed to Kill, released in 1980, directed by Brian De Palma, starring Angie Dickinson, Michael Caine, and Nancy Allen. The synopsis of this film goes like this. Kate Miller, played by Angie Dickinson, is a sexually frustrated woman who wants more out of her life, more specifically, her sex life regarding her marital status. Kate goes to her psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Elliott, played by Michael Caine, for her appointment. She ends up talking about her marital problems, and Dr. Elliott thinks that she needs to vent her anger and frustration at her husband, who has been giving her what Kate has called a wham-bang special when she was in bed. As she finishes her appointment, she heads to the museum where she was supposed to meet her husband, but he does not show up. In her husband's place is a mysterious stranger whom she ends up following to the taxi cab where they had sexual intercourse as well as her having an orgasm. Kate and the mysterious stranger, now identified as Warren Lockman, end up staying in a hotel where they stayed until the night when Kate had to leave to get back to the house, and she also forgets a few things before she leaves the hotel room: her panties and her wedding ring. When she ends up trying to retrieve her wedding ring from the hotel room, she ends up getting murdered by a blonde woman with dark sunglasses and a razor in her hand. The only witness who notices that Kate was murdered by this mysterious blonde woman as the murderer is the call girl escort Liz Blake, played by Nancy Allen, who has now been accused of the murder of Kate Miller. After she was picked up by the police, Dr. Robert Elliott finds that his patient was murdered by a patient of his named Bobby, a transsexual individual who was denied of having his sex change operation from Dr. Elliott. Peter Miller, played by Keith Gordon, is at the police station feeling guilty that he didn't save his own mother. After his mother's death, he ends up trying to figure out a way to find his mother's killer by trying to identify which of Dr. Elliott's patients is responsible for his mother's murder. And can Liz be able to clear her identity of finding out who the real killer is before it is too late? So what can I say about this film? Well, the film is something to behold. I love the story and the fact that it is a visual film with a lot of techniques that evokes Hitchcock's language. But in my humble opinion, it is not a Hitchcock film. It is instead a film that utilizes his techniques and style, but it is not his style or his storytelling method. Do I think the film is controversial? Yes. But only because people who have never seen it or heard of it, mostly from word of mouth, are missing the big picture of what it means. You have to look at it from the standpoint of when the film was originally released. I would never say that De Palma is a trashy filmmaker. I would say that he is a masterful filmmaker in his own right. Sometimes all great works of art that we see today started out as trash. De Palma knew how to make great art. Would a film like this be made today? No. It would not be made not just because of the accused misogyny and violence against women in this film, but it would also be viewed as transphobic as well. The 20th century logic that is used in the film, identifying transsexuals as having a mental disorder, has now been considered outdated and rejected by the 21st century logic as well as within the transgender community. But overall, I like De Palma's use of camera movements and choice of lens for story reasons that would give the greater use of thematic context. He is also very instrumental in his use of visual and thematic imagery as well as motifs such as the use of doubles or the use of the split screen to create double imagery. I appreciate the performances of Angie Dickinson, Michael Caine, Karen Allen, and Keith Gordon in this film for their standout performances. De Palma began working on the script during the post-production stage of his previous film, The Fury, released in 1978. The ideas for the transsexual and the psychiatrist were originally two separate ideas, but they ended up being merged into this screenplay. Also, he saw the Phil Donahue interview, which was later used in the film. Also added in the script were incidents from his own past, including meeting up a girl that he met in the museum some years ago, and having the character of Peter Miller to be loosely based on Brian De Palma, and later an incident with Warren Lockman, who, it turns out, has had a sexually transmitted disease of gonorrhea and syphilis. So that really happened to a friend that Brian De Palma knew many years ago. He called his producer George Litto if he wants to read the script. Litto responded by saying that he will come over to De Palma's house in a couple of hours. He went to De Palma's place and he read the script. Litto said that he loved it and the project was greenlit. The film was going to be produced by Samuel Z. Arkoff and released by Filmways Pictures, an independent film and television production company. With the pre-production all set, now it was the time to move on to the casting stage. The first actor he needed for the role of Kate Miller, the sexually frustrated housewife who would later be killed halfway throughout the film, De Palma originally wanted Liv Ullmann, but the actress declined to play the role because of the story's violent nature. So he instead reached out to Angie Dickinson. Dickinson was known at that time for playing Sergeant Pepper Anderson on Policewoman, which at the time of filming this movie was finished. So she read the script and she was uncomfortable with the nude and sex scenes in the picture. When De Palma asked if she would be comfortable with a body double, she said, "Oh yes." She got the part. Sean Connery was the original choice to play Dr. Elliot, but he was unable to do it due to other commitments. So the role ended up going to Michael Caine. The role of Liz Blake was specifically written for Nancy Allen since she was married to Brian De Palma during the pre-production stage. Other cast members who were selected for the film included Keith Gordon as Peter Miller, Dennis Franz as Detective Marino, and David Margiles as Dr. Levy. Filming began in New York City on October 17, 1979, but there is no record of when the filming wrapped up. It was shot entirely in New York City with the exception of the museum sequence filmed in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. When the film was wrapped up and after it was edited by looking at the dailies and with the finishing touches from the score by Pino Donaggio, as well as cinematography by Ralph Bode, the film was submitted to the MPAA board. Unfortunately, the film was given an X rating. The scenes that were taken or altered to receive an R rating included an extended shower sequence in the opening of the film, the murder of Kate Miller, including one shot of Kate getting slit near her eyeball with a razor, and lines of dialogue such as, "Well, because of the cock in your pants," which was changed to, "Well, because of the bulge in your pants." De Palma accused the MPAA of censorship and repression. However, the MPAA chairman, Dr. Richard Hefner, defended their actions as meeting the obligations to American parents. The film was met with further controversy before the film's opening, with feminist organizations and women's rights groups such as Women Against Violence Against Women about the film's violent treatment of female characters. The defenders of the film included some critics who praised his work and the star of the film, Angie Dickinson, who defended the film as well by stating, "People should experience reality at the movies. In this case, well, what violence is really like, not something cleaned up." Another defender of the film was film critic Sheila Benson, with her careful choice to praise the film, and she stated that she felt more anguish when women are portrayed as stupid like in Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo or How to Beat the High Cost of Living. In the most recent period, the film was met with further controversy for its supposed transphobic nature. The film was featured in the Netflix documentary Disclosure for the media's role in the depiction of transgender characters in movies and television. The film had its Los Angeles and New York premiere on July 25, 1980. The critical reception was mixed. The film was met with praise from some of the major critics, praising his visual style and storytelling methods, while other critics criticized the film as being trashy, exploitative, and also accusing the director of being a Hitchcock ripoff. The film earned a Saturn Award for Best Actress for Angie Dickinson, and Nancy Allen received the Golden Globe nomination for New Star of the Year, and also received a nomination for Worst Actress from the Golden Raspberry Awards. My last thoughts on this film is that I would disagree with the Razzie Award nomination, that this film is terrible and that the performances are bad. It is a controversial film that deals with a topical subject matter that may make audiences cringe, but I enjoyed the film all the way through, and I found that it was a great experience to watch it from beginning to end. I mean, this film is now part of the Criterion Collection, which is often reserved for highbrow films. I appreciate what they have done, and I think that it is a high honor for a film like this. And I appreciate the performances and the direction of this film overall. That I think is my personal opinion. We will be right back with Allow Me to Explain. With a month left before the midterm election, the Supreme Court is bound to not only push the country further to the right, but it is also taking up a case involving a dangerous right-wing theory that will have devastating consequences for our country that could end democracy before we know it. It's time for Allow Me to Explain. The Supreme Court's term started on October 3rd, taking up cases involving voting rights, the environment, affirmative action, LGBTQIA+ discrimination, and now election laws in a case known as Moore v. Harper. So what is the case known as Moore v. Harper, and how will it impact not just election laws in the country, but also on American democracy itself? So this case, known as Moore v. Harper, involves a court decision on whether the North Carolina Supreme Court has the power to strike down the legislature's illegally gerrymandered congressional map for violating the North Carolina Constitution. The legislators from the North Carolina Congress have started arguing a debunked interpretation of the United States Constitution known as independent state legislature theory. This theory would allow the state courts and constitutions to be rendered powerless relating to federal elections. So let me provide a little backstory about this case. In 2021, North Carolina's Republican-dominated state legislature passed a party-line vote on extreme partisan gerrymander map to lock in a supermajority of the state's 14 congressional seats. It was considered so extreme that an evenly divided popular vote would have awarded 10 seats to the Republicans and only 4 to the Democrats. The United States Supreme Court ruled that the federal courts cannot hear partisan gerrymandering cases. The voters contested the maps in state court, contending that the map violated the state constitution's free elections clause, among other provisions. In February of this year, the North Carolina Supreme Court agreed with voters and struck down the map, describing it as an egregious and intentional partisan gerrymander designed to enhance Republican performance and thereby give a greater voice to those voters than to any others. So who is representing this case? The proponents of this theory that will argue for the decision of the gerrymandered map will be the North Carolina State Legislature Speaker of the House, Timothy Moore, who will argue that state legislatures do have the authority to regulate federal elections, prohibiting any state entity, state courts, or governors from placing checks and balances on that power, while the opponent of this theory representing the case is represented by Rebecca Harper, who represents the nonprofit organization Common Cause North Carolina, and describes that ISL is a fringe idea pushed recently by a small group of politicians hoping to prevent better voting maps and fair election outcomes. Rebecca Harper and Common Cause won their case at the North Carolina Supreme Court before with their nonpartisan and convincing arguments based on historical precedent. So the next question is, why did the Supreme Court pick up this case? The court did not provide any explanation as to why they picked it up, but it could be related to a conservative agenda that was part of a decades-long goal for an organization that you may have heard of recently, the Federalist Society, headed by Leonard Leo, whose goal is to promote these conservative and far-right ideologies to our government by using legal and political strategies toward changing American politics and law. And he is also helping to boost candidates with financial backing in a string of key court and state legislative races for this year's midterms. So what would happen if the Supreme Court ends up agreeing with the North Carolina state legislature? State lawmakers would then be given free rein to legislate around elections. This would mean that state politicians would create even more barriers to voting access, draw rigged voting maps, and cast doubt on fair election results. And it would ultimately create widespread purges of voters from voting rolls and cut popular early voting options, and would be allowing to violate voters' rights during the federal elections. So what can we do about this situation? Well, thankfully, Common Cause North Carolina and Southern Coalition for Social Justice have teamed up together and have provided the necessary tools that you need to learn about this issue. There is a link to learn more about the next steps of what can be done to address this issue, and with less than 6 weeks to go before the midterm elections, visit the link at scsj.org/more resources. There you will be provided with an educational toolkit as well as the next step resources packet. You can also educate yourself by going to these websites to learn about the court case, such as brennancenter.org, lwv.org, ncdp.org, scotusblog.com, and check the PBS NewsHour episode from September 11th, 2022, and check the segment How the Outcome of Moore v. Harper Could Impact Federal Elections. You can tweet special messages about this case, educate your family and friends, as well as share your opposition to this case using the hashtag #PeopleOverPolitics. I hope that this persuasive learning experience will make you realize that this is not just any ordinary midterm election, but one of the most important elections for the country and for democracy. This has been Allow Me to Explain. You have been listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, and I know I don't say this as much, but if you want to be involved in recruiting or registering new voters or also helping out during this year's midterm election, just make sure that you sign up to be a poll worker, because we are running a shortage in this state right now, and we need as many poll workers as we can to make sure that our votes are counted accurately and without any bias, because we are seeing a big distrust amongst poll workers, and we fear that if these poll workers are to be distrusted, then there would be chaos in this year's midterm election. So I also encourage anybody who is listening to this episode to please make sure that you are registered, make sure that you have registered for vote by mail, because the deadline is on the 11th, and make sure that you are registered to vote before the deadline on October 11th. It is not too late. You can sign up at votehillsboro.gov. This is just for my listeners in the Hillsboro area. If you want to get involved in helping to spread the message of this year's midterm election and how to register voters, please subscribe to some of the accounts on your Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram accounts to Civic Influencers, Access to Vote Florida, or any other voting rights organizations such as When We Vote. I highly encourage anyone who is listening to this episode to please do this right now. It is an important must. And because this week is Voter Education Week, I want to make sure that everyone who is listening to this episode also make sure that not only are you registered or that you have requested your vote by mail ballot, but that you also have a plan of when you are going to vote, either in person or whether you want to do it early voting. Make sure that you have done this so that you know what your plan is before getting ready. And also that you must make sure to know if your state, mostly specifically Florida, has a voter ID law, and that if it does, make sure that you have the right identification requirements for this upcoming midterm election. And to my listeners who are voters with disabilities, make sure that the polling location does have accessibility. If it does not, make sure that you provide your complaint to the specific polling location at your site. And also go to these nonprofit organizational websites that I have just mentioned before, such as Disability Rights Florida, AADP, that is the American Association of Disabilities Project. Also, make sure to check out Access to Vote Florida, as I mentioned before, and also make sure to check out Civic Influencers. They are one of the best nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations helping to get out the vote and to register as many voters who are often downturned from voting. And the target age that we need is 18 to 30 years old, mostly college students and those who have graduated. So this is just something that I thought would be a recommendation. This series is now available to listen to at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, and Google Podcasts every Friday. It is also on my blog website, filmtalkwithjordanramirez.wordpress.com, with my latest podcast episode on the page labeled Episodes. You can contact me on my social media feeds such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I am also available on Letterboxd. If there is a film that you recommend that I would put for my next review, make sure to submit it to my social media accounts. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.